Hello, and welcome to our Extension Ed Talk. Our topic today is taking a new look at fermented foods. I'm Donna Krug. I'm the District Director and also Family and Consumer Science Agent here in the Cottonwood Extension District that is comprised of Ellis and Barton County. My office is in the Great Bend community. A year ago, I put in a request to write a fact sheet about fermentation. So my first question to you is, what do you think of when you hear the word fermentation? There is a wordle here to show you what many people think of, and I know when I presented this information, people would say, oh, I think of wine or beer. But many people also think of fermented foods such as sauerkraut or kimchi, or a newer product on the market, kombucha. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is how maybe you can learn more about fermented foods and how they could be incorporated into your healthy diet plan. So again, this is just a slide that will show just a little bit more. Is actually me working in my home kitchen, getting the ingredients ready to put kimchi into a wide mouth canning jar. And that's what we'll be talking about today. My contact information is here, and it is also listed on the back of the fact sheet that I'll be sharing here today. So we want to begin by talking a little bit about the history of fermentation. You know, fermentation has been around many thousands of years. In fact, 7,000, or here it says 6,600 BC. And there are many different claims to who discovered fermentation. But Louis Pasteur did call the fermentation process la vie sans air, which means life without air. And so that's just kind of a clue as to what we're going to be doing here. The information that I shared in the fact sheet actually talks about the folks from China building the Great Wall of China, and they had been given a lot of cabbage, and they knew that preserving that was going to be something they needed to work with. And so they actually buried it in a pot and they salted it because we knew that salt would help to preserve the cabbage. Well, imagine their surprise after about 3 to 5 weeks of that being buried, when they opened it up, it had a pleasant but sour aroma and flavor, and they had actually made sauerkraut. Now, there are many other stories about the history of fermentation, and I won't go into those today, but it is just fun to hear that fermentation has been around many, many thousands of years, and it is gaining in popularity again because people have found there are some benefits of eating fermented food. So today, I actually have brought some things with me to the studio that are fermented foods. So sourdough bread is made from, not from yeast, but actually from a mixture of flour and water that is then kept at a room temperature, and it begins to ferment and bubble. And that becomes the product that then helps your bread to rise when you make sourdough bread. Other products like kefir, buttermilk, yogurt, those are all dairy products, and they are fermented foods as well. Something that is a little bit newer on the market that we haven't maybe seen as often is called kombucha. And kombucha is a beverage. This one happens to be have some ginger in it, so it'll have that ginger flavor. It is a little bit of a fermented, it's got some acid in it, so it's going to, you don't want to take a lot of it, don't want to drink a lot of it at a time, but it does provide some good healthy bacteria in your gut. We'll talk more about that later. I didn't bring a couple other things that I have at home in my refrigerator. There's miso. Miso is a fermented soy paste, and it is also very health promoting. There are other, even soy sauce or tamari is a fermented food that you might add to something. And then of course there's things that we know about like our sauerkraut and our kimchi. So those are some things, and I would just encourage you, if you've not tried some of these products, to maybe try them and taste them and see if you like them, and then add them into your healthy diet plan. I have some different objectives, and the first one is just to make you more aware of the different products that are on the market. But my objective number 2 is actually to help you become familiar with that history and then learn about different resources that are out there. I found this link to the Colorado State their website to be very helpful. In fact, the picture of the kimchi that you see here is made from the recipe on that website. And that is just, again, a very, it's a good research-based website, and I would just encourage you to take advantage of going to that and taking a look. Another objective that I have is to help you acquire the skills to see the tools that are used to ferment foods in a mason jar. And I actually brought a wide mouth mason jar with me today. And I also brought several different fermentation kits. And I'll be showing those in the next segment of my presentation. But you know, when maybe our grandparents or others in previous generations fermented food, they got big crocks and they made lots and lots of sauerkraut at one time, sometimes as much as 25 to 50 pounds. And I don't know about you, but I don't have that much storage space if I were going to try to keep that in my refrigerator. So I think the idea of canning or putting a fermented food in a wide mouth canning jar really works pretty well. And I think that way you get a little bit of a chance to really experience it. So, all right, I'm going to now go to my 4th objective, and that is that we want to help you learn about the health benefits of eating fermented foods regularly and restoring healthy gut bacteria. There are many studies. I was turned on to a very interesting speaker a couple of years ago in Salina at their Healthy Foods Conference. Dr. Will Busewitz, or we call him Dr. B, talked about restoring healthy gut bacteria. He is a gastroenterologist, and he talked very positively about the health benefits of including more fermented food in your daily routine. So it's about time for a break. When I come back, I will talk a little bit more about that, and then I will show you the different tools I have for putting your fermented food in a wide mouth canning jar. So join me when I come back.
From the soil to the sky, you're dedicated to your farm operation. Through it all, Rogers & Associates Insurance is standing beside you and your business. We can customize an insurance plan for your operation. We provide coverage for residential needs, personal property, and outbuildings. We also cover farm and irrigation equipment, ATVs, and other farm autos. Contact Rogers & Associates Insurance to protect your farm operation.
Welcome back to our Extension Ed Talk. Today we're talking about taking a look at fermented foods. And I'm Donna Krug with the Cottonwood Extension District. As we were closing out the first segment, I talked about the good, healthy gut bacteria that you get from eating fermented foods or from eating pre or probiotic foods. Perhaps you've heard that term. And so there's all sorts of vegetables, some grains, a lot of beans are what we call pre or probiotic. So those are good things for us to have to help us have a healthier gut. So now we're going to talk about the techniques for fermenting vegetables. And there are really 2 main methods. The first one is called dry salting and brining, and that is pictured on the left. And then the other one is the actual brining. So let me talk a little bit about both of those. The dry salting method here, my husband is actually doing, getting some Napa cabbage. It's 1/4 of the head is having salt rubbed into it. And that will then be allowed to stay on that cabbage for a period of a couple of hours before we rinse it off. But what the salt does is it helps to bring out the moisture, the liquid inside the cabbage, and we call it macerate. So what you're doing is you're going to be adding the salt, letting it set up, and then we'll be massaging it to get it to actually break down and soften that product. Now the actual brining method is used more for chunkier vegetables, and that is where the usual brine strength is 1 cup of water and 1 teaspoon of fine ground sea salt, or just make sure it's non-iodized salt. I'm not promoting any brands with any of the things I have here on my table today, but I just want to reinforce that the salt you use needs to be like pickling salt or non-iodized sea salt, or and also the amount of the actual kits and the information I have on fermenting. I'm not promoting any one kit over another. I'm just showing you there are many alternatives. So let's move on to the next step. After you are working the product, you've let it set up for a couple of hours, you would be cutting your cabbage into very fine pieces, usually about 1/4 in width, and then the picture on the right shows the kimchi. Kimchi is a Korean condiment that actually you would add to the Napa cabbage. You would add carrot, green onion, and ginger and garlic. Those would be the spices that you would use. Now there is the true kimchi recipe would also add red pepper flakes that are from Korea. I have ordered some online before, and my family just really prefers the one that is not quite as spicy, and so I do the white kimchi, but there are actually over 200 kimchi recipes available. So just make sure that you find one that is from a EDU source, from a source that is research-based, and I think you'll be just fine, and you can experiment and see what your family likes the most. The next step, after you have worked that and massaged it, we have several rules of success. And first of all, one of the rules is to start with fresh vegetables. You'll see on the left, I have a nice big head of Napa cabbage. Actually, that head of cabbage was 5 pounds. So it actually made 2 quarts of kimchi. And so you'll want to pay attention when you purchase your food or your cabbage in the store, see how much it weighs, and then that will help you to determine how much salt needs to be added for proper fermentation. So a 2-pound head of cabbage requires 2 tablespoons of salt, again, non-iodized salt. Now, if I was going to do the 5-pound head of Napa cabbage, I needed to add nearly 5 tablespoons of salt to make that to properly ferment. Sometimes people ask me, can you skip that because I'm really watching my salt intake? Perhaps you have a doctor that has said you need to limit sodium in your diet. And I have to be really honest with you. You cannot leave the salt or really cut the salt down in your fermented product because it will not ferment. That is a necessary ingredient. But let me tell you a couple things that you can do to lessen the strength of the sodium when you are eating the product. With the kimchi, when you add the sodium to that, the salt, you are leaving it in there while it is drawing the moisture out. But once that has been done, you actually rinse the salt back off. So you're taking some of that sodium away from your finished product. With sauerkraut, that doesn't happen. You're leaving the 2 tablespoons for every quart, but what you can do when it is properly fermented and you've put it in your refrigerator, then you can actually take the amount of sauerkraut you plan to eat and rinse it, and that will rinse away some of the sodium. So those would be the 2 ways you can reduce the sodium in your product, but really you can't change the recipe and have it turn out. When we are talking about rules for success, we also want to wash all surfaces and containers with hot sudsy water. Now you notice that in the pictures, and if I were doing a demonstration in person, I would not be wearing plastic gloves. It does not have to be sterile, it just needs to be clean, because actually some of bacteria from my own self needs to be part of that fermented food. So that would be one of the rules of success. Another rule of success is not to overfill or underfill your jar. And so I have a quart jar here with me today. This canning jar, you want to make sure you're using a canning jar and not just an old discarded mayonnaise jar or something like that. You really want it to be canning quality. So this canning jar is quart size, and if I were filling this jar with fermented or with sauerkraut or kimchi, I would fill just to the neck of the bottle, about where my finger is, and no farther. And as you put handfuls, a couple handfuls into the jar, then you would take this product came with the kit that I'm showing here. It's called a pickle pounder, and you would actually go into the jar and you would push down, and you would really push down hard to get that sauerkraut to actually, again, create moisture that comes up above it. And so you would fill the jar with sauerkraut up to the neck. And then the kit that I'm showing here is from Mason Top. Again, there are many different ones on the market. I'm not promoting it one over another, but it does have a weight, and you can probably see it's a disc that's made out of glass, solid glass, and it would actually fit down in the jar and go just above the sauerkraut. Before I would do that though, I would actually, out of one of the outer leaves of the cabbage, I would cut a round piece of a cabbage leaf, and I would put that on first. The idea with fermented foods is we want to keep the product down below the weight and the moisture on top. You want to make sure that you have it like that. And then after you do have the weight on there, you would replace the flat with this silicone lid, and you would then screw it on, and that would be taken to your place where you're going to ferment. Well, it's about time for a break, so I'm going to, when I come back, visit about other types of fermentation kits that I have seen on the market and have tried with success. I'll be back in just a minute.
The team at Homestead Assisted Living is a proud supporter of the Hayes community. Located just west of the Sternberg Natural History Museum, Homestead is a warm and welcoming community where residents receive compassionate care from licensed professionals. If you're curious about senior living options for yourself or a loved one, make Homestead your first call. Our kind and courteous staff would love to show you around and answer any questions you may have. Call us today to schedule a tour of Homestead or visit us online at homesteadofhayes.com.
Hello, I'm Donna Krug, and I'm back with the final segment of taking a new look at fermented foods. And I hope that the last segment, when I was talking a little bit about rules of success, and I showed you the kit that I had from actually from my hardware store in Great Bend. So I know those are available there, and also they're available online. And so you can see in the slide that, again, it had the weight, it has the pickle pipe, that's the silicone that fits in there instead of the flat, so it allows air to escape or gas to escape from the fermented food that is going to bubble and produce gas. And then, I don't know if you can tell from this slide, but I also want to date my product. Kimchi, the Korean condiment that I talked about, just ferments for 3 to 5 days, while sauerkraut takes more like 3 to 5 weeks. So it's always a good idea to put the date of when you take it to your place where you're going to ferment the food. For me, that is in a basement room that is cooler than my upstairs. I have a cabinet that has a closed door. I simply put a towel underneath my product so that if it does bubble out, like for instance, that purple sauerkraut, when I made it, it bubbled out and I had purple come out of the jar. And so you want to make sure you've got it, something underneath it, but have it in a cool, dark place and let the fermenting begin. So before I want to get to the final part of my presentation today, I want to show you, I didn't have these fermentation kits on hand when I produced the PowerPoint, but they are excellent to use. And I, again, want to show you that there are many choices out on the market. So this one is from, it's a company called Trellis, and I ordered it online, and it comes with 3 of these springs. And what the spring does is we put it into the top of the jar after you've filled it to the neck with your product, and then it acts as the weight. So instead of a glass weight, it is a spring-loaded weight. And then you will put a lid, and it may look like a regular canning lid to you, but there actually is a one-way valve with a little silicone insert here, and it just allows the gas to escape again from your jar. So you would actually put it into your jar just like that and screw it on. And then this other kit came from a discount store, just from a Walmart store. Again, I'm not saying it's one you should try, but if you just wanted to try one jar, one time, and see if it's for you, this could be a good option because it was the least expensive of the 3 kits. The first one has enough to do 4 jars at a time. It had the pickle pounder, it had more pieces to it. It was right at $55. This one was about $20, and this one was under $10. So that gives you an idea of what we've got on the market to give you that option to make your own sauerkraut or fermented vegetables. The other thing I haven't talked about a lot today yet is the temperature. And we want to make sure that with our fermented product that we give it time and pay attention to temperature. The best optimum temperature for fermenting food is between 60 and 70 degrees. I like doing it down in my basement because it's usually right around 65 degrees, and that is optimum. If you get much above 70, it becomes too warm and the ferment will happen more quickly. So even doing it in the summer, you need to check your sauerkraut a little more often because it may ferment more quickly because of the warmth in your house. If it gets below 60 degrees, it has a hard time getting fermentation to happen. And so that's, again, the temperature range is between 60 and 70 degrees. Now, after you're finished, you will take out the spring, you will replace it with the flat and the regular lid, and then you need to refrigerate it. If you are making just a couple jars at a time, you probably have room in your refrigerator for that. If you're making 25 pounds at a time and you're doing 9 quarts of sauerkraut, you may need to process it. And for that, I would encourage you to use a safe method. So Easy to Preserve is a resource that I have used, and I really like it as a way to preserve your sauerkraut. I will tell you, though, that once you heat it and are preserving it, you are going to kill some of the good bacteria that you have created in that ferment. So my choice is always to refrigerate it if you can. The reviewers that took a look at my paper thought it would be helpful if I talked a little bit about the glossary of different terms related to ferments. And, you know, I'm very comfortable talking about ferments, but maybe you have not heard of lactic acid bacteria, but that is exactly what is in our fermented food. So it's present in the soil, it's present on the food, and it's just all around us. We've talked a lot about lactic acid fermentation, and that is exactly what we've shown you here today. Also, the probiotic activity, that is providing our gut with bacteria that helps our immune system. It also improves our digestion and the use of the nutrients that we are eating. We hear the word microbiome, and that's kind of a big scientific word, but it is actually a community of microorganisms, things like bacteria, even fungi and viruses, and those will inhabit a particular environment within our human body. And so we have it inside of us. We just need it to be a healthy microbiome. And then the final 2 are related to the 2 types of fermentation that I talked about today, the dry salting and the brining method. So those are great little tools for you to know that you've got that. I hope that you will go to the website and take a look at the fact sheet. It looks like this. And if you go to the KSRE website, it is actually publication number MF3491. And if you just Google that, or Google taking a new look at fermented foods, you will be able to pull this up on your computer at home. Before I close today, I want to just show you some of the resources that I used with presenting this presentation to you. Probably one of the best resources for fermenting foods is a book by Sander Katz called The Art of Fermentation. He has done videos and just has a lot of great information in this book. Also, he has another book called Wild Fermentation, and it's got some fun recipes that would, if you're excited about trying some of these, it might be good. And then the individual that I talked about at the beginning of the Extension Ed Talk, Dr. Will B., who wrote the book Fiber Fueled, talks in a great deal about the importance of adding fermented food to your healthy meal plan. Well, I hope that I have gotten you excited about maybe tasting some fermented foods and maybe trying to ferment foods in your home kitchen using a wide mouth canning jar. Again, I hope to visit with you again soon.